Dancer Wellness deals with putting aside perfectionism and giving our students tools to recognize when those obsessive kind of perfectionistic tendencies are kicking in and how we can replace them with healthier behaviors. As I mentioned at the beginning of this webinar, perfectionism is something that I struggled with very deeply. And I think it's one of those things like body kindness. I don't think it's something that any dancer ever hasn't encountered or struggled with. So it's a big one, but it can definitely be tackled. So perfectionism can be defined in a couple ways for our purposes here today. We can think about it as the relentless striving for extremely high standards, and then the judging of personal self-worth on the achievement of those extremely high standards. Now, I probably don't need to tell any of you this, but perfectionism is an epidemic in the dance world because it contributes to eating disorders, high injury risk, deepening mental health concerns like anxiety and depression, and high rates of dropout as well. And I think the thing that's probably most toxic about perfectionism, especially within the dance world, is that it's driven by a fear of failure. So when students are in its grip, when they are in a moment of perfectionism, they get sucked into all or nothing thinking, they avoid challenges and then therefore actual improvement. They might procrastinate and they'll have low self-esteem. And then any one of those things can snowball and create big wellness problem for your dancers, which is why addressing it with them and giving them skills to manage it is so, so important. We want to make students aware that perfectionists actually achieve less than those with healthier attitudes because their focus on perfection robs them of motivation and can bring on procrastination and other self-defeating behaviors. So that's a quote by Elizabeth Scott there up on your screen. And I thought that was just a really nice and succinct way to kind of sum up why perfectionism is not actually something that we want for our students. We talk a lot in our culture in general, but also in the dance culture about perfectionism or perfectionists being a good thing, right? Sometimes we talk about like, oh my God, she's such a perfectionist. Her dancing is so beautiful, right? That goes back into our language. We want to stop and think about the language that we're using and make sure that what we're conveying to our students is actually it's not really such a great thing to be a perfectionist. Now, just how like we eased into gratitude and body kindness with our dancers, we're going to do the same thing with perfectionism. Because if we come in really hot and hard with this thing that you're doing is bad and we have to change it right now, we're not going to get very far with our dancers. The walls are going to go up, they're going to resist, and we're not going to be very successful. So the first step in putting aside perfectionism is actually acknowledging that there is a little bit of good in it. And that goes, again, like with along the same lines of what I was just saying. No, being a perfectionist isn't necessarily considered a good thing, but that doesn't mean that there's not elements, that there's not things that we can pull out of being a perfectionist that are a good thing. So that's what we want to do with this idea of adaptive or positive perfectionism. We show our students what the good parts, what the beneficial parts of being a perfectionist is, while also educating them on the not so great parts and encouraging them to let those things go. Here are your IRL tips for getting dancers on board with adaptive perfectionism. We're going to add not yet and tomorrow into your corrections and the conversations that you have with your students. We're going to use and really lean on humor and then turning comparison into compassion. I know that's a big one, especially dancers who are on social media and watching professional dancers, right? There's always the element of comparison that comes in where, oh my God, she just did 4 pirouettes. I can only do 1, right? So I'm going to give you a very good tool to flip the script on that and turn that comparison into a little bit more gentle, softer compassion. Okay, so starting with the language. So, adding phrases like not yet and you'll get it tomorrow can make a huge difference. Again, it's one of those really small tweaks that you might think wouldn't really make a difference, but it can actually be really transformative. And I have a story I want to share with you about the amazing Sylvie Guillaume. So, Sylvie Guillaume came to New York. I forget if it was ABT or City Ballet, but she was going to be dancing with them for a couple of performances. So they're at the theater and she's up on the stage rehearsing this part, this very specific passage, and she's doing it over and over and over again and just can't seem to get it. And, all of the company are in their seats watching her because it's Sylvie Guillaume. And after a while, she just can't get it. And so she walks off the stage, she flops down in a seat, and she just kind of shrugs her shoulders and says, tomorrow. And I felt like that's just such a beautiful story and a beautiful way to encompass the fact that even professionals, even amazing dancers like Sylvie Guillaume, have days where it's just not working. But there's always tomorrow. There's always the possibility of tomorrow. So I love that story just for so many reasons. Feel free to pass that on to your dancers as well. And start using words like tomorrow or you don't quite have it yet when you're giving feedback, right? Those are magic words that you can start using with your dancers because they're going to pick up on that and it'll start to sink in for them too, right? If they hear you say it, then they're going to internalize it and say, oh, yeah, I didn't get it today, but I'll get it tomorrow. I don't quite have it yet, but that doesn't mean I won't have it tomorrow, right? So you're just encouraging kind of a broader sense of thinking about their abilities and what they can do. Now, another great weapon against perfectionism is humor, one of my favorite ones. So, to quote a very well known dancer and Instagram account, who I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with, Biscuit Ballerina, she struggled a lot with perfectionism. I was reading more about her story and I pulled out this quote. She said, to get over my imperfections, I started exaggerating them and laughing them off. It's a great way to remind myself, hey, no one's perfect and no one has to be. So, encouraging humor with your dancers can be as simple as showing them the Biscuit Ballerina Instagram account and having a conversation with them about it, or showing them this quote and having a conversation with them about it. You want to help them draw the conclusion that the version of how bad we think we've done that lives in our head is never really as bad as we think it is, right? It's always up here. It's always our inner critic that just kind of distorts everything. It's never as bad as we think it's going to be. And humor is a great equalizer. So be willing to share your own personal stories that you might have that you can laugh off now. Maybe you have your own kind of Sylvie Guillaume story that you can share. Another idea is that you can have an on purpose bad or silly dance party, or maybe a daily exercise that you do where you just say, okay, all bets are off. Like everybody do this exercise as terribly as you possibly can, right? Within safety. Always we want to be safe with our dancers. Or you could even just consider pairing a dancer up who you know is struggling, who's really taking things hard, taking things seriously. Pair them up with a dancer who maybe has a really good sense of humor, who's good at getting people to laugh, and pair them up and see if they can work together to kind of equalize each other out. And never underestimate the power of just being playful with your dancers, encouraging them to be silly, to be playful as they approach their dance training. And that fosters a sense of curiosity, which is another really wonderful weapon for perfectionism. Just getting curious about, like, oh, I wonder why I'm being so hard on myself. I wonder why I'm having trouble with this step, right? It encourages that experiment, that scientist within them to get curious rather than judge.